Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're thrilled to have you join us as we explore the topic of using Power BI and Microsoft Analytics technology to improve forecast accuracy in manufacturing. My name is Adam Maxim. I'm with P3 Adaptive. I'll be your host for this session. We have two fantastic speakers with us today, William Brown, who is a Fabric Principal Technical Specialist at Microsoft, and Justin Manhart, our Chief Customer Officer at P3 Adaptive. They'll walk us through strategies, real-world examples, and a demo showcasing how Microsoft's analytics platform can enhance forecast accuracy in manufacturing. Now I'll hand it over to our first speaker, William Brown.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? Just double check one more time. Good, all right. So like I said, I'm William Brown. I'm a technical specialist, which means I get to cover all aspects of Fabric. And this is a subject I find really one of my passions. Anyway, I also want to say thanks to P3. When we started talking about this, one of the things that immediately came up was their focus on both technology and solutions. They were really focused on delivering something that was valuable, not just as a pure amount of technology, but about something that actually solved a set of problems. And I spent a ton of time talking about Fabric as a technology. I don't spend nearly enough time talking about it as the results that come out of it. And quite often I don't actually see the results that come out of it because I spend all my time talking about purely as a tech stack. So this is a treat. Forecasting and planning is a big topic, and it's actually applicable to large parts of the organization. And what I wanted to get primarily out of early on is talking about how BI tools are about communication. It's about what is important to an organization. As I like to joke, a KPI is just an important number, just a number that has some meaning to the organization. What that number is, where it's trending, was that trend good or bad? Are we meeting our goals? Those are all things that kind of make it up. But that kind of thinking applies to many different aspects of a business. So if you're not in, inventory optimization, which is a big part of this topic, it's still applicable to how you build and maintain Power BI. And I always say is, for example, sales going up is good, but cost going up is bad. And inventory going outside a range can be good or bad. It just depends on what the goal is and what the metrics are. So it's really important to be thinking about the data and how you're delivering it and how you're communicating it. And this applies that concept of understanding your data and communicating it effectively, really important in forecasting and planning, but it's also important in project management, in finance, in headcount planning. I've done several office space planning discussions over the last few years where people are trying to optimize their office space. That's a planning scenario, maybe not thought of specifically in that space, but it's something that's applicable to various different planning scenarios. So as you're looking at this kind of concept applies to broader parts of the business. I want to dig a little bit deeper, and as this topic becomes more technical, it becomes more process focused, and it's really important to think about the outcomes of these processes. I think this is one of the more complicated areas, is when you think about planning, quite often people start with very big picture items and they don't think about the actual outcomes. And so you got to understand what you're trying to accomplish and then what are the drivers for that accomplishment. Sometimes it's about getting closer to real-time data. And I use the term real-time a lot, and I'm going to caveat that. Data needs to be as close to real-time as practical and as necessary. I hate, people often ask for real-time data, and in reality, they don't need it. It's an expense and a complexity that maybe having up-to-date data 3 or 4 times a day is sufficient. So you do have to think about what the outcomes are and what the deliverables are going to be as you're doing your planning, because otherwise you're going to spend a ton of resources on something that doesn't have an impact actually on the business. As I go through this and we talk about various different points in all of this, I want to talk about how business planning is about future looking, and we'll touch on some of that, and I have a good example for that. And we talk about business planning, and this is about getting closer to real time, about tracking your information, and about an inventory optimization, often about collaboration with people across the organization. So depending on what your goal is, you're going to have different types of data, different types of reports, and different types of solutioning. So it's really important when you start thinking about forecasting and planning that you drill into the pieces of the solution and those final results and then go backwards. It's a very bad habit, and I am guilty of this. This is why this is painfully obvious to me, that we start with data and we push our way forward. And again, where I think the complexity here is, it's very easy. And if you look at these in a vacuum, they all overlap. and there's a lot of um, um, that side by side. It's hard to distinguish these, so it's very easy to make a muddle out of take a problem and not realize what the actual outcome is and drive to that, because otherwise, if you think about stock out and inventory optimization and dealing with excess inventory, these are all different related problems, but the outcome is very important, that you have a targeted goal to go to when you start building these up, so that you don't try to build everything all at once. This kind of problems are very complicated for a number of reasons. One of which is that we are expecting disrupted supply chains now and going on into the future. And disruptions, even short-term disruptions in your supply chain, in your ordering systems, can actually cause downstream effects for weeks or months. And when I first was putting some of these thoughts together, my original thought was that technology investments would be one of the major drivers. And that's been a big driver. AI, you can't turn on the news without hearing about AI of some sort or another. And that would be a really important driver in understanding your forecasting and planning and dealing with data. But honestly, I think of late, we're seeing how external events have a huge impact on this as well. Inflation's been going on for years, but we're also looking at geopolitical issues. What happens if tariffs go into effect? How does that downstream effect affect my profitability? Where am I going to do my orders from? I was reading a bit by a house builder, builds homes, and he's like, if my cost of wood goes up 20%, I'm out of business, or I'm basically going to be doing break even if I'm lucky. So it's really important to look at all these different factors. So when it comes to the complexity here, you have to realize there's internal factors and external factors, and we'll talk about those. And you'll see these are just some of the factors that come into complex supply chains. The good news is a lot of the basic ones are time related, and Power BI and any BI tool worth its salt understands time logic. And you can look at this. You can look at if a day of week, if you're in retail, you can look at seasonality, you can look at monthly trends. All of those things can have an impact on it. And that's a really well understood problem. But then you get into things like pricing. How does price affect? And I'll give you an example. This is something I built many years ago of a system, and we did we had a pricing model for sales. It was very complicated because of the way prices were set by customer and by product. There were a lot of exceptions to the process, and they would negotiate a price, but then they would place orders throughout the year, or over the life of the contract. So when they would look at orders today, they would look at prices from months ago, when we were always having to change today's sales versus prices at an arbitrary date backwards to understand how prices affect actual sales. And then what they were doing was they were pulling data manually and assembling this in Excel. What we did was automate that process. Where it got even more interesting was we started pulling data out of spreadsheets, out of PowerPoints, of competitive products to see where lower prices in one area of a competitor was stealing our business and how we could adjust for that. So by integrating both external data, pricing, contract data, and order data into one system, we took a manual process that was error prone and hard to run and expensive to run scenarios on, and something that they could do multiple different scenarios in the same hour versus multiple scenarios could take days to extract the data and run all of the reports. So that was a process of getting people to a maturity curve where we took them from systems integrations and a lot of exports and pulling data in to moving up into phase 2. Now, everyone who sees this slide immediately jumps on to phase 3, where they want to get to the autonomous systems. And I always say this is a journey. To get there, you have to start at phase 1 and work your way through the different phases. If you're on phase 3 or you're getting close to getting enabling phase 3, you're probably in the wrong webinar, I'll be blunt. But if you're getting to phase 3 and you're finding that, wow, this is hard, or we're not getting the answers we want out of it, the solution is not more AI, it's better data. It's better integrated data. It's going back to phase 2 and laying a good solid data foundation. So this is a journey about moving in that direction. And even if you never get to autonomous systems, you can add a lot of value to what you're doing here simply by getting into a mature phase 2, environment. Getting to a point where you have consistent information that everyone agrees on, that's standardized, you're not using different different prices, different products, different sources, and bringing all of that together where you're now collaborating on it is an immense value. And if you're not doing that, you're never going to get to an autonomous system. It's just getting to that mature phase 2 can be a game changer by itself, and then you can start building on top of phase 3. But everyone wants to immediately run there, and without a good data layer and without a good ability to track your information and report on it and validate what the autonomous systems are doing, you're simply never going to get there. Talking about, and this harps on this quite a bit because I think it's an important point, in the forecasting and planning applications, that middle paragraph you'll see in that little pyramid chart they have there. We start with infrastructure, and of course it's Microsoft, so it's the Microsoft infrastructure. Forecasting and planning is the very next step, and then you can layer more and more complexity on top of it. It's in the forecasting and planning where you understand your data, you understand how to optimize your operations. It's about understanding what are the hidden drivers, the things that you don't know about, or you do know about, but they're in people's heads, and systematizing that and bringing it all together. So this is where you start bringing in multiple different data sources and rationalizing it together. It's about getting to the right latency of data on top of your environment. You may never get, again, I don't like stressing real time because I don't think it's always necessary. Sometimes you often need to reduce the latency in your data, but you don't always need to get to real-time data. You have to look at the cost benefits. And now you can start collaborating on data. 3 analysts pulling their own data, doing their own work, and coming up with their own results is valuable. 3 analysts using the same data and collaborating on that to understand it is immensely more valuable. We are greater than the sums of our parts. And once you've done that, then you can start getting into the more advanced things about about the risk management, about getting ahead of supply chain disruptions, so that when you do see a potential disruption in your supply chain, you understand what the risk is, and you can start looking at how to mitigate that risk because you have access to all of that data. Talk about a couple of things as I wrap up when we get into some of the technical aspects of this. The first one, we'll talk a bit about demand planning, and then we'll talk a little bit about inventory optimizations, and we'll start getting into some examples here. Demand planning is probably one of the holy grails of planning and forecasting because it is so future looking. It is really about predicting demand, and this is hard because you're looking at not only your data and you're looking at the trend of data, but you're also looking at drivers that you don't fully understand and trying to predict what's going to happen based on past events. And in many cases, you don't have good data that helps you predict those past events. That's where the business people have to look at that data and figure out what the actual impact of change is going to be, and let you proactively address those challenges. So this is one of the hard parts because I think this is where having data that is not necessarily your data that gets into potentially weather, pricing, competitive analysis, that go into effect to figure out what that demand planning is. Yeah, actually, I do see the chat. Absolutely. Actually, I did work for a clothing manufacturer, and absolutely, fabric costs, weather, trends, all of those things were really big issues in driving what was going on. The bigger issue, and actually the thing I spent most of my time with a clothing manufacturer, and this is I think a really useful example. Now, mind you, these are screenshots I have stolen from the data stories gallery. I love these 2 screenshots. I use them on a regular basis. If you haven't seen the Power BI data stories gallery, it's a ton of fun to search around and look for examples. But this is an inventory aging report. This puts all the information both at a high level, i.e., what is my overall exposure for my inventory and how much am I sitting on dollar-wise that has not moved yet. I've also broken it out by warehouse to know where I'm aging my most. And then it gets into the detail level of seeing what products are doing it as well. This puts a ton of information on a single page that at a glance I get to look for. And if you look at the navigation on the sides here, that's great. That navigation lets me look at different data sources in the same environment. I don't have to change my context to go look at a different slice of data. And what that gets to is an inventory, a reordering report, where I'm looking at my inventory balance. So now I've gone from an aging report to an inventory report in a mouse click, inheriting my contacts from the previous page. So that allows me to look at, this is what's sitting around, this is my exposure in dollars if I don't sell this product, and then I can immediately go look at my inventory and see what's going on and understand where I need to start placing orders. And because I have both of them, I can say, these products aren't selling, so maybe my inventory, my stock level is wrong for these products. That's where the two things side by side really start offering a lot of advantages, so people can determine how the aging data and my shortage, my reorder points may need to be adjusted, and that's where you start adding value. So that's my rush through of all my thinking around how forecasting, and I'll turn this on over. So thank you very much. I hope that was useful.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate all the insights from your tours into this arena with your customers and the work you're doing. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's a very challenging topic, very, very difficult to solve. And I think for me, I really want to emphasize that phase one step in the journey that you laid out. We work with clients, we talk to organizations on a daily basis who are still very much at the starting line of getting their arms around these types of issues. And with all the hype we hear about new technologies, whether it's generative AI or advanced analytics or machine learning, it can absolutely make you feel like you are behind. And I'm here to tell you, you're not behind. You're ready to get started, and you can make progress on these things using the Microsoft ecosystem. I want to start here. We're going to dig in. We're going to look at a demo. We're going to look at some examples of how we might integrate this data to extract more meaning from it. But as we were working on this topic, I was reminded of something one of our employees said on a podcast that our CEO and I put out every week. One of our directors, Madison, we were talking about manufacturing, and she says, as soon as you start pulling your data sources in, your sales, your inventory, your purchase orders, your demand forecasts, your shop floor work orders, you start to say, how do I tie all this together? What's the one thing that ties all this together? And it's material ID. And it's this fundamental idea that we can integrate all these things into a cohesive solution that's going to really help us. And so we hear customers talking about a few common challenges. You know, we're looking for better ways to understand our demand. We're always trying to understand, are our forecasts good? Are they useful? Is there a better way to forecast? Does our production and our inventory and our supply chain, does that all tie back to that demand? And does it make sense? Can we tell a cohesive story about what's going on through this whole life cycle? And so what we see as a very common reality, and I'm sure you all do as well, is we have all of this information. We have demand forecasts in some fashion. We've got plans for production, we've got POs, sales orders, inventory, backlogs. But as Will was alluding to before, this information is often looked at in silos. So there's sales teams working on their forecasts, there's production teams working on schedules, there's material planners thinking about what to reorder and to how much, but we're lacking that cohesive story that ties it all together and answers, are we performing as well as we could? What decisions do we need to make to bring it all together? So what the tools today allow us to do is to bring all this together so we can have an integrated understanding, so we can understand how a forecast impacts a production plan, understand how that plan relates to the bill of materials to create finished goods, and do we have enough inventory? Do we have too much inventory? And so that's what we're trying to achieve with tools like Power BI. And so, you know, I always start with sort of like simple tools, simple assessments, just to sort of gauge where you think you're at. And the first question is, do you have a comprehensive data set that integrates all those related functions? The second question is that data set capable of answering common questions across a vast combination of categories? Can you look at it by customer categories, region, pricing, and some of those things Will was alluding to earlier? And do you have interactive visual tools that your team uses daily or weekly to manage and adjust that planning? And my point of view here is, if the answer to any of these questions is anything other than absolutely yes, then you have an opportunity, and things like Power BI can absolutely help you. And so we're going to get into that here in just a minute. And so we're not going to get technical in today's demonstration at all, but if you've been paying attention to what Microsoft has been doing, you've heard about Fabric, and the great opportunity for organizations today is it brings everything we need to go pursue these analytical challenges. It's got everything we need to integrate our data from various systems and sources. We can bring that together and represent it in a common data set that gives our business data meaning. And so we can deliver solutions to our users in the form of reports and dashboards, and set ourselves up to go pursue those phase 2 and phase 3 ideas that Will had presented earlier, whether that's data science, real-time analytics, if that's applicable. But again, it all starts with a good foundation of bringing everything together and focusing on the problems we think we can pursue together. So I'd like to get out of the slide deck and move over into a demonstration in Power BI. Right. So here I've got a Power BI report, and it's based around a fictitious company that that we made up here at P3 called Axiom Dynamics, and we manufacture mechanical and telemetry products that are used across the world. And so, like many organizations, we currently have a sales team that provides a forecast. Right, so it's a monthly process. I know many of you probably have something similar. Teams get together, they talk about what they know, and they look at maybe historical data, and they say, hey, here's what we think we're going to be able to sell. Right, and so what we're looking to do is make sure our data can help us answer a few questions. Does our forecast make sense? Should we project something different than the forecast based on what's happening in our data? Can we meet the forecast with our schedule? Do we have enough inventory to meet that schedule? And so what I'm going to do here is we're going to look through an example of a dashboard that I think we see fairly often. It has a lot of information, but it doesn't necessarily provide the level of insight or meaning that we can go after with tools like Power BI. And so I'm going to distill this down into 3 very simple concepts, and hopefully give you some ideas that you might take back to your team and your organization to consider pursuing. And then we'll finish with what maybe a revised dashboard concept might look like that would be more helpful to us as we try and integrate various sources of information. So let's go through this. So here's an example of something I see very often. So here at Axiom Dynamics, we make 3 products. We have our advanced machine. It's one of the most advanced machines you've ever seen. It does amazing things. And sometimes people need our basic widgets to support our advanced machines. And if you've got more than one advanced machine, you're going to need our smart sensors so the advanced machines can talk to one another. And so here we can see our historical sales. We can see our open orders by our sales regions. We can see what's being forecasted. We can see our production schedule. We can see what's on hand and on order. And yes, it's all here and it's at my fingertips, but this isn't integrated in terms of how I'm presenting the analytics to the end user. I can click on regions and slice this data down, but it's not giving me any clarity as to the questions I laid out earlier. So let's walk through 3 simplified concepts that hopefully inspire some thinking amongst the group. Understanding if a demand forecast makes sense is a problem I've been fascinated with for a long time. And what I always try and ask customers is, do we have a way to try and calibrate this forecast? If all we're relying on is the forecast itself as it's come in from the team, we're probably missing an opportunity to improve the analytics. Right, so in this example, what we're looking at is we understand in our data the accumulation of orders over time. So what we're seeing on the left here is the orders that we're going to deliver in January is represented by this top dark blue line, and we can see kind of the pace at which those orders come in. and the pace at which the orders for February come in, so on and so forth. And so on the right, we see the forecast that's been provided by the sales team. But then what we can do in Power BI is we can say, okay, let's augment that forecast with what we're actually seeing in our actual data. How fast are orders coming in? What's the volume? And so we can see things like in February, the pace is, maybe slower than usual. And that's why we might project it's going to be actually down from the forecast. Or we can see April might be pacing much ahead of schedule. And we're going to see we might project to finish ahead of schedule. And so, of course, we're able to run these calculations in the background to create the visualization on the right, right? And so this just provides us a tool to understand, hey, is what we're being told by our forecast, does that jive with the data? Something we talk about at P3 a lot is, does the story that we're hearing, does it match up with the data that we're seeing? And so this is one technique that we can use to try and affect that. And of course, we can look at this by our 3 different finished goods. We can look at it by different regions, everything we'd expect from Power BI. So that's the first step I always want to try and consider is there a way for me to calibrate this forecast and see if there's a way that I can rationalize if it does or doesn't make sense? So this is one technique we can apply to that idea. The second thing I want to understand is, given my demand or given my projected demand, can I meet that with my current production plan? And so one of the issues I've experienced in my own career working in manufacturing organizations is, if you look on the left, we have inventory shortages, but these are often perhaps just reported directly from like a warehouse management system or an order fulfillment system. And it's sort of unaware of what the actual demand is or what the actual forecast is or what our actual ability to produce is. And so on the right here, we can use Power BI to deliver calculations that help us understand, represented by these dark blue bars, because our materials, our finished goods have a bill of materials that's in this integrated data set. We can go traverse that, understand our inventory, the quantity that's needed to produce one of our finished items, and we can determine, hey, we only have enough inventory that'll be here in our facility in the month of February to make 568 of our advanced machines. And that's going to leave us short on our schedule by 283, but only short of our demand by 121, right? And so now we can open up conversations with our complete team, our inventory team, and our material planning team. Can we pull in delivery dates of our open POs? We can go to our sales team and say, can we defer delivery dates for some of our customers, right? And so Power BI allows us to understand these things. And we can see even out in April, we've got some increasing demand for the advanced machine, and we should get ahead of that to make sure we can go there. And so because we have an integrated data set that's looking at our demand, we're making some projections based on what we're actually seeing in our data. We understand how our finished goods relate to our raw materials and our consumables. So then we can run calculations in our data set to suggest what we actually need in addition to what we actually already have on hand. So we can project in Power BI what's going to be on hand in our facility out into the future based on our current signals. And so I've highlighted these numbers up in our table here. We're going to need some more circuit modules if we're going to hold to our schedule. And even on our gear sets, we can understand the difference between, okay, to meet our demand, we're going to need 121 more. To meet the schedule, we'll need 283 more. Again, maybe we can pull in the delivery date on this open PO. Maybe we can do a partial shipment. Maybe we can go out and defer some of these orders. But the idea here is I've understood the full life cycle by integrating this data set between what I have demand for, what I need to produce, what I need to in order to be able to produce, and where I need to take some form of action. And so the end result here is we want to bring that type of story into a dashboard, right? And so instead of just looking at what's our historical sales, what's our open orders, we can see, what are we forecasting versus what are we projecting? How does that shake out in a variance to our production schedule and our demand? and just get us straight to the information we need to understand. Do we need to order more materials? Do we need to bring more things in-house? Do we need to work with our customers to try and defer some orders? And so when I think about these problems, I'm often reminded of some experience I had at prior jobs where a production manager would come up into the office and find, a material planner and say, hey, I've got this job on the line right now, and I don't have enough of this to execute. And, they're both feeling like they both should have already known each other's situation, but because they're looking at their information in silos and not in this integrated fashion, they're missing out on the opportunity to bring that all together in an integrated story. So this is just three simple concepts. Can we calibrate our forecast? Can we make better projections? Can we understand how reliable we think that forecast is? Can we tie that demand to where we're actually planning to produce, what we're actually able to produce, what material issues do we have? And we can see that all together. And so this is an example where now we're much closer to the actions and questions we need to pursue from here. So hopefully this inspires some thinking for you and your teams, and you can take that back. So that idea of the journey, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, we see a lot of people still on that starting line, and you can absolutely get started. So, how do you get there? Start with the end in mind. It's such a complex problem. There are so many things you can consider doing. Maybe for you and your team and your organization, it is that idea of let's just associate our production plan with our inventory through that bill of materials concept. So we got a better line there. Maybe it's no, let's do some analysis on what we see in our historical data to inform how we could potentially better forecast. Start small, start focused, move fast. Don't accept long timelines. You can get a long ways in a short period of time if you stay focused. Once you've got that focus, you understand the piece of the puzzle you want to solve first, you bring that data together. Power BI is the best we've seen out there at integrating that data, making it easy to run calculations that intersect across those different domains of information, allowing you to enrich your metrics, make them more actionable and more targeted, and then keep improving. We always like to say BI is a project that never actually finishes. There's always something we can expand upon, always something we can improve and iterate on. So keep going and keep improving as you go. So that's our philosophy for how to make progress and how to get through phase 1 and closer to phase 2 on your data journey. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some of those ideas with you today. And I believe now, Adam, we're going to jump into some Q&A.
That's right. I'll take this back. That was awesome. Thank you, William and Justin, for sharing your insights. If you haven't had a chance to submit your questions yet, you can do that in Q&A. The button up at the top. I had one while we get started. Justin, if our bill of materials has sub-assemblies, can we do the same type of reporting?
Yeah, so actually in the demo data set we built, the advanced machine bill of materials has a couple sub-assemblies. So that's just a matter of how you might model that data, right, for your analysis. But if you've got a complex system, lots of sub-assemblies, maybe some of those you can order or you can build them. You can integrate those same concepts that I showed today with a more complex set of information for sure.
John Keegan asked, can you provide any guidance on cost to engage P3 for such a project?
Yeah, I think shoot Adam an email. he can help you out with that. So.
From Gregory, do you use any statistical modeling to evaluate the forecast from sales?
Gregory's question, do you use any statistical modeling to evaluate the forecast from sales? I think for me, I always want to understand, like, what options do we have right now to try and calibrate that forecast? Can we use that accumulation of orders? Maybe our systems don't support that type of information. Can we go back and look at the historical forecast versus actually what happened? And can we introduce variables to that to try and understand, okay, what leads us to over and under a forecast? So yeah, there's an opportunity there, Greg, to try and figure out what makes the most sense. And so you might do some modeling and some analytics to try and land on, okay, how do we want to do this on an ongoing basis? So that's certainly an option.
Yeah, I've certainly used, especially looking at different variables, using linear regressions to find, patterns in the data. I often find, and using even things as simple as standard deviations to point out outliers in the data, I, works. It's just quite often depends on the audience of the data. I find statistics sometimes confuse people. That you're better off with the simplest possible message, but realize that data could be reused for different audiences. So I think that's important to realize that when you think about statistics is who's consuming the data, because there's a lot of folks who aren't gonna, understand the impact of a standard deviation.
This is a
As
good
for
one.
the right back,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
near my heart.
Brian's asking about right back for demand planning back to a Power BI model.
That in itself is a huge topic by itself.
By itself, yeah.
By itself is a huge
By
topic.
itself. Yeah, it's honestly, I think it's a fascinating solution if you can implement one. There's a lot of options on the marketplace today. Microsoft just announced there's a native write back capability in Fabric that's coming out. You can do things with Power Apps. I think someone in the chat mentioned tools like InfoRiver. There's another product called Acteris that we use quite often. And those are great solutions because it brings the analytics right back with the like the data input or the feedback loops, and also to maybe do some more interesting like scenario planning. So we can actually have a field where I might input what if demand goes up or down or in this types of ways. So I think it's massively impactful when it's done well. I think a precursor though should be a good understanding, a foundational understanding of your data, how it all comes together, and what some of those key drivers are, so that you can go down those projects with some confidence.
Yeah, I have a few customers who've using various of there's at least 4 or 5 different write back tools, and now with the native one that's going to show up in Power BI real soon now.
Yep.
There's different options depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And again, based on the scenario, different tools become much more applicable. But yes, people are absolutely using write back, running through scenarios where users will create a scenario of data. I'm going to make some assumptions. What's the actual impact going on? And because they're doing it in a centralized data source, building out scenarios and recalculating results, it's easier to share and collaborate together. And I think that's the real power there. It does have the complexity of having to bring a third-party product. I believe some of them work with Power BI report server. I'd have to go back and double check. I'm sure some do. I don't know which ones, but I think InfoRiver does is one of them. I'm almost certain InfoRiver does, but I'd have to go. Yeah. Don't hold me to that.
Yeah, I know Acteris has a suite that is supported for on-premise.
Oh, is it? Okay.
We've implemented that a couple of times. Oh. On-premise, we've several times in cloud, but so yeah, if you're on-premise, there is still options for you.
Great. Melinda asked about how would you account for a lack of sales because you were out of stock on components to make the finished product?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I think the answer, I think, really comes down to, well, what does your actual data say? So, for example, if you're, I've actually experienced this, like some legacy systems won't allow you to create like a production work order if the materials don't exist to fulfill it. So that's probably, we'd have to understand in that scenario, okay, can I still place the sales order? Does it go into like a back order status? And so I can see like there was demand, that order came in. Whether I fulfilled it late or not I think that's going to be dependent on the state of the data that we're trying to leverage there.
And in some cases, I've seen it where we'll, if we realize we have an out of stock situation for a product, we'll have a calculation that puts in like a number of, an average amount of sales dollars just to highlight the impact of
Sure.
what a gap in the sales will do. But it comes down to ideally this is actually tracked in your inventory or ordering systems that this is falling into a backlog, or you get into sort of where the order is canceled and there's a reason code behind it. But
Right.
it just depends on your data. It always comes down to that.
That's right. That's right.
Another one I realized as we were talking there, a lot of organizations don't have something like daily order snapshot data. What would be the approach to fill that gap?
Yeah, if that were a project I was going to tackle tomorrow, I would keep it real simple, and I would start building data pipelines in Microsoft Fabric that start creating those snapshot records. Yep, it's a very established pattern of development at this point, and so some platforms do it natively where they have snapshots and change logs, but that's not always the case. So that's an opportunity where you can start enriching your data by creating a solution like that.
It's one of the nice things about Fabric is having it integrated now makes it a lot easier to start creating snapshots like that without making
That's right.
without the necessarily the work involved. You can snapshot that data, store it historically, and build your analysis on top of it. Yeah, that's unfortunately a lot of places don't have daily snapshots. It's a shame. It's a useful thing.
Let's see what else we got. I see a question from Philip. How do you determine your projected forecast? So great question. So in the analysis I was showing in the demo, effectively what that calculates is the expected percentage of orders that are turned in at a particular point in time relative to the month they deliver. So for example, if 30 days before the month, we expect 50% of our orders to be in, and so if we actually have 100 orders placed, we would maybe project, okay, there's going to be potentially 200 orders placed. But that calculation, we actually go back and traverse seasonal periods. So when we're looking at delivery months for January and February, we're looking at only prior Januaries and Februaries in that example. So we're not, if we have high seasons, low seasons, we can adjust for that seasonal factor in there as well. So that's how we approached it for the purpose of that example. And that's a technique we've used several times with different nuance based on business criteria.
One of my personal favorites was we were doing figuring out daily sales, and one of the requirements was not to compare this day versus this day a year ago, but it was the same day of week a year ago. Mm-hmm. So this Monday versus a Monday a year ago. That was fun logic.
I bet. We call that that concept of being fair with your metrics, right? Are we comparing things that make sense to be compared?
Yes.
To help us with things like those projections.
Yeah. And same store sales is another fun one to calculate.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, before we go today, if today's session sparked any ideas for you, made you think about how this could work for your business, let's keep that conversation going. We'd love to chat with you one-on-one about your specific needs, whether it's demand forecasting, inventory optimization, or broader analytics use cases beyond what we covered today. You can book a personal consultation with us to explore your use case and get tailored recommendations. I'll include a scheduling link for that, along with the recording and the follow-up email that we're going to send out. And the last recommendation I'll make is to follow P3 Adaptive on LinkedIn for more updates about future events like this and industry insights throughout the year. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks again to our presenters, and I hope everyone has a productive rest of your week.